All right. It is 1:04 a.m. on November 6th, 2024. And these are the current and looking like close to final results of the presidential election. This is how I spent the past 8+ hours watching the results come in. As you see before you, you've got a number of different news sites, all representing the election results as these maps. We've got NBC News on the top left, Politico top center, CNN on the top right, Washington Post bottom left, ABC News bottom center, and then the New York Times bottom right. First off, let's take a look at some of the graphic attributes of these maps. We've got color, which is a big thing. Obviously, we've got red for the Republicans, we've got blue for the Democrats. NBC News goes pretty vibrant, really bright red, really bright blue. Works pretty well given like the muted palette of the rest of the website. We take a look at Politico, leaning a little more towards the orange with their red, so not quite as vibrant there. And then even the blue, it's a little bit more muted. It's not as bright, it's not as saturated. So you're going to get a little bit more of a contrast situation between the red and the blue there. We take a look at the CNN, super vibrant, really bright. Almost obnoxiously bright, honestly, and weirdly enough, the red is not the same as like the CNN red that you see in the subscribe button. Washington Post goes the completely different direction. We've got super muted colors, very desaturated red and blue, probably just trying to make it a little bit easier on the eyes. ABC that we've got here. Oh, in fact, you know what? An ABC is not even my favorite that we've got. I'm going to switch it over. Oh, there we go. Yes, to Associated Press, which I think is a much better map. So forget that I had ABC up there. But I've been looking at all sorts of sources. So here we've got a very different map. But again, looking at color first. Pretty decent, vibrant blue, decent vibrant red, but we'll talk a little bit about how they use that spatially in the future. And then finally over to the New York Times, we got a nice red and blue, again, not super saturated compared to like pretty much all of the ones at the top, pretty desaturated in fact. And just kind of finding that balance between brightnesses between those colors. So next consideration that we probably want to have is around typography. Typography, specifically when we're applying it to the cartography here, is really about labeling these maps. So we can start off again at the top left. We'll take a look at NBC. They've got this just pure white on the color surface, unless it's one of these unfilled, still too early to call states, where they've switched that to black. And these flipped states where they have black text on a little white block. They went with a very condensed typeface, which might be a little bit detrimental to accessibility purposes. But overall, the contrast works pretty well. It's, again, a question of size. Compare that to Politico in the top center. We've got this very bold, highly accessible, highly legible typeface. They went with this white with a little bit of a black stroke, almost kind of a drop shadow on it, which is pretty effective, I would say. And then for the states that have an undeclared, we have black with a little bit of a white glow around it. It's very subtle, but it is there. CNN, we take a look at this. This I am not a big fan of. So it's really small type. It's black and it has a really kind of robust white glow around it, which to me it hurts my eyes a little bit. And because it's so small, I just feel that this is like accessibility, legibility issues. Same is going to go for the Washington Post down in the bottom left. It probably is not as big of an issue because, well, they went with like kind of truncated names for a lot of the states, right? Whereas CNN, they just went with the initials. And also the muted colors, it's just not the vibrancy is just not there, right? It's the weird contrasting between the super saturated color, the white edge, and then the black fill of the letters. AP News, I gotta say, pretty clean. Again, the major accessibility issue here is the sizing of that type, but you can blow this up, right? I've got 6 of these on my monitor at once, so these are probably going to be scaled down a bit. But yeah, it's not very condensed. It's a very uniform, very geometric typeface that they chose, so fairly legible. And then finally for the New York Times, I would say very legible. They also went with not the abbreviations like we see with the top 3 and even the bottom center with the AP News. They went with the kind of truncated names or just full names if they can fit, like Texas here. And that makes it just pretty legible overall. So the next thing that we would probably look at here is how effectively they use their legends. So this is always a really interesting thing, is like, how do you tell what the graphic symbolism is for a given map, right? Or chart or graph or whatever. So if we take a look at the upper left, right, we'll start off with NBC News. We can see this clear indication. We've got Harris, blue, win, flip. So flip meaning that a state was for the other party and then it got flipped to this party, and so it's going to have these little diagonal stripes in it. So that would be blue naturally. And then Trump, we've got the red with the same kind of conditions. And then above that, we have this nice kind of bar chart. And it's a kind of a shared bar chart because ultimately they're just trying, it's a race to the middle, basically. Whoever gets to the middle quickest is the winner. And so we see that pretty clearly. They are indicating in nice bold lettering, also color-coded. What the actual numeric value is for the electoral votes that are coming in. And then below that, as a nice detail, is we actually see the popular vote that is coming in, as well as the percentage of the overall popular vote. So that just updated as I was talking about it. So we got 64 million for Kamala, 69 million for Donald Trump. So a nice level of detail. It goes all the way down to those singular votes, literally, right? So every single person that cast a vote, that's them. That's being counted up. It's nice to see that detail. We jump over to Politico's results, on the other hand. We have a little bit of an indicator here. So we see like leading in one, we see Democrat and GOP. So leading being these ones with the little stripes, which is a little bit different, right, from NBC. They use that to indicate flipping. And then, blue and red, pretty standard. If we look at the top here, we see that they also have this kind of, first person past the goalpost type chart of this split bar chart. And they do give us the indicators here of how many electoral votes have gone to each person. They do not give us the popular vote anywhere in this display, which is kind of a bit of a bummer, I gotta say. If we look at CNN, pretty similar to NBC News, right? We've got the electoral votes up here. And by the way, like, you're probably looking at this and going, why are the numbers all different? It's because, these different outlets, they decide when to confirm or project, ultimately, because they do this before all of the votes are actually calculated. They project who is going to be the winner of each state. And so from there, they're kind of guessing what the total number is going to be in the end. So we've got the electoral votes, the name, the party. Down below it, they put more emphasis on the percentage of the popular vote, which is interesting. And then they put the total number down below that. I think that makes a lot of sense, actually. Because the percentage, you're gonna process that much quicker in your brain than trying to compare 64 yada yada million to 69 yada yada million. Now you're gonna know 69 yada yada million is more than 64 yada yada million, but you're not gonna know really by how much, right? Like relationally, proportionally. That's really what we're talking about. That's why it's important to like look at these by percentage. We go down to the Washington Post down here, and what do you know? There's well, we've got blue, we've got red, we've got reporting votes. Okay, not very interesting. If I scroll on this website, oh, look at that. Now you're actually giving me more information. So the problem with this website is the layout. It's that it's not putting all of this in a nice dashboard view where you can process these things together because they're associated. You want to be able to see that total electoral and popular vote and the ratio between them, in addition to the overall geographic map. It just makes sense. Now, back over to the bottom center has to be my favorite of all of these, honestly. The AP News. This is a pretty beautiful layout of how you would do this. You've got a little legend at the bottom center, lead and win. So the desaturated, they're in the lead. And when they've been confirmed or projected to win, that's where it's fully saturated, red and blue, as you would expect. We look up at the top, and we have, again, that kind of diverging bar chart, maybe is what we call that. I don't know. Race to the middle chart, right? Trump's making his way up there. Now, the interesting thing about this is rather than it just being a single contiguous bar, is that it is broken up into all these little chunks. And each of these little chunks is actually a proportionally sized segment based on a state that has been projected to win by that candidate. And it is sized based on the number of electoral votes in that state. And here's the kicker, they're also alphabetical. So here we go, California, Colorado, Connecticut, DC, yada, 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 right? And then you can go from the other side for Trump, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, blah, 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 blah. Right? So it's actually a really, really cool way of using a bar chart, but also kind of activating it to show more details, right? It's actually showing all the segments that add up to that. You go, wow, what's that big segment right there? Well, it's Texas, right? 40 electoral votes. In addition to that, we've also got the total number of votes for each side and the percentages, so you get that great detail. If we go over to the New York Times in the bottom right, they've got a whole break. Oh, no, I clicked on stuff and changed everything. What did I do? Oh, no. Oh, that was unexpected. Can I get back to that? Let's try this. Okay, there we go. All right, well, this is a little bit of a different chart, but we'll look at this anyway. So what's nice about this is clearly, we have this breakdown of color. We can tell when they won something versus when they've flipped something. So they add those dark stripes to this as opposed to like the light stripes that we see up in NBC News. They also give us a breakdown up at the top. We see the electoral count. We see these, again, this diverging bar chart, race to the middle. We have the individual votes and the percentages broken down here. Really great. Really nice detail, nice overall typographic and hierarchical breakdown of all of this. What would be the last possible thing that we could possibly look at? Well, each of these charts is interactive. And with that interaction, we are hoping to reveal additional details. So let's start with the hover over interactivity from each of these charts. So if we take a look in the upper left, we have our NBC News, and I'm going to go ahead and hover over Texas here. And so what we see is we see the state, we see the number of electoral votes, the percentage of votes that are in, and then we see a breakdown top to bottom of the candidates, and they are ranked by the number of votes that they have received. And we also see the percentage of votes that they've received. And it's a nice little highlight of who ends up winning there. So Trump got 56% here. We go to New Mexico. We see Kamala got 51.6% here. And so you can see that the ranking in terms of their order changes. And as we kind of move around this, we see that little panel, little floating panel that is kind of attached to my cursor, kind of updating as we go along. It's very responsive. I don't have to click on anything. In fact, if I click on something, it takes me to a totally different page. So I'm going to go back. But what's nice about this is that you can just kind of freely hover over stuff. And it reveals the differences between these different states. If we take a look over at Politico in the top center, it also has a hover function. This time, it's a little bit more limited. We don't see the photos of the candidates. We do see their names. It does give us the votes. It gives us the percentage. As we move along, you can see that the ranking changes based on who is in the lead for each of these different states. And of course, it gives us at the very bottom there the number or the percentage of districts that have reported their votes in. So a good number, good amount of detail, right, that you would want to expect from this. Over to CNN. We hover over these. I like this one from a kind of a hierarchy typographic standpoint. I think they did a really good job of just the layout of the information. They've color-coded it, which is nice, and they're also giving you more detail beyond the two primary parties, which is good to see. So you end up seeing the, let's say, 3 follow-up parties that are receiving the most votes beyond the Democratic and Republican parties. As we scrub along, you can see that it does change the ranking based on who is in the lead. And of course, it tells us the number of votes, percentage of votes that have come in. And a nice little detail is that it also shows you of when it was updated. So you can tell if, oh, maybe my connection went down or my browser hasn't been updating, things like that. If we go down to the bottom left, let's take a look at the Washington Post. This is also something that's worth kind of remarking is that I don't know if the video footage is picking this up, but compared to, let's say, this top middle chart here, where I'm kind of very smoothly scrubbing my cursor around and this little panel is updating with information. When I do this over in the top right, it's much, much choppier. The frame rate is probably reduced to between 10 or 15 frames per second. So there's something about the, I don't know, the methodology they're using. Maybe they're using HTML5 Canvas without WebGL, something like that, but it's causing it to be a little bit choppier. That's not something that we experience down here. It's actually quite fluid, and what's interesting is it doesn't necessarily stick to my cursor. This little panel kind of floats. It's kind of got a little bit of inertia to it, which is an interesting kind of physical quality to apply to an interface element. As we scrub along, we basically just focus on the red and blue. We look at the Republican and Democratic parties and see really just how Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris are performing. We get the total number of votes, we get the percentage reported, and we get the estimated number of votes that have been counted. Pretty straightforward stuff. When we move over to the AP News layout, this is a bit of a weirder one because instead of filling the entire state, we have just a bunch of different little blocks. And of course, each of these little blocks represents a single electoral vote that belongs to that state. And this can be maybe a nice way of proportionally showing the actual voting power from each state rather than showing the overall topographical area of land that each state has, which can be a little misleading, right? If we take a look at like Wyoming compared to, Colorado, for instance. They are almost the same size geographically, but Colorado's got, I don't know, about almost 3 times as many electoral votes as Wyoming because of their population. So when we hover over one of these little squares that we see here, we actually get the additional detail that we're able to see about that state. So each square is going to tell us just overall about the state. It's not like a granular detail on counties or anything like that, but it tells us the total number of electoral votes from that state, gives us the candidates ranked by who is in the lead, tells us their party, the color association, number of votes, percentage of the overall votes. Below that, we have the other candidates and the total number of votes and the percentage for other candidates. And if you want to see the detail around that, it has the names and the percentage for each of those candidates. So, like Kennedy, Stein. Now, it doesn't tell you that Kennedy is independent and Stein is Green Party, but I don't know. You kind of have to know that, I guess. And then, of course, it tells you the total number or percentage of votes that have been counted. So 98% in this case. So pretty good amount as we kind of scrub along. Not the greatest experience, I would say, given the fact that you kind of have to jump over a little blank area, and that causes this kind of shutter effect where it's kind of stuttering, it's flashing, right? And that's not like a super pleasant user experience. That could probably have been alleviated. But the amount of information and the detail and the layout of the information is really quite nice. If we jump over to our New York Times map here, very, very fluid. As I just kind of roll along and hover over these things, this thing will just very smoothly move, very just completely connected to the cursor. And as I do that, it reveals more information. So it tells us the state I'm over, the total number of electoral votes, who's the projected winner, the party, the votes, the percentage, and the number of votes that have been tallied so far. So great amount of detail, very, very clear, very accessible, I would say. This might be, well, other than let's say the lack of detail on third-party candidates, I would say this maybe is my favorite among the use of hierarchy and typesetting and just very clear legibility. And then finally, what might be good to look at is the fact that many of these maps, if not all of them, have some different modalities for display. So if we start off up at the top here, the NBC News, we can take a look. First off, we're in the U.S. map mode, and we can change it between looking at the entire U.S. map, or we can just look at the battleground states. So if we switch to the battleground states, and for those of you that are unaware, international students, maybe you're not familiar with how the Electoral College works, but there are many, many states that ultimately just kind of always go in one party's favor. And then there are a select few states that may go one way or the other, depending on their vibe. So we've got Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. And these are what we call swing states. And that's because they might swing Republican or they might swing Democrat. And given their populations, that will cause somebody to win or lose. So because of that, we tend to isolate our perspective to look at these. That is what you see in mainstream media. If you're watching the news, they are going to focus on these select few states. But why not when you visit their website? You can isolate your view and your perspective to just kind of focus on those as well. We also have the opportunity to switch from the U.S. map to the electoral vote map, which now is not too dissimilar from what we see in the bottom center with the AP map. At this point, rather than using these little squares, we are using hexagons. Hexagons are great because they fit together nicely. It's one of nature's most perfect shapes. Just ask the bees. And what's great about that is that now we are getting a much more fair, proportional perspective on each state's contributions when it comes to their electoral votes. So we can see regardless of the size of the state, again, the comparison that I was making between Wyoming and Colorado, right? It becomes that much more clear when we're talking about the size of these things. So it's quite valuable to be able to kind of flip to a slightly different perspective. You've also got the opportunity to kind of zoom in and move around, which is a good thing for accessibility, is like giving people the opportunity to kind of get a little bit of a closer look on things. If we take a look at the top center, the Politico map, well, we've got our states breakdown here. We can switch this to electoral. Now, they take a very, very different type of representation. I'm not even sure what the name of this type of graph is. It's some sort of cartogram. Where you've basically broken down the geography of a actual topographical space, and instead you are using the size to represent the, let's say, amount of influence or whatever quantitative value. In this case, it's the electoral votes. So California, quite large with its 54 electoral votes. Same with Texas with its 40. New York up here with 28. And then even down in here, well, what is that? Nebraska, number 3. Nebraska is a unique situation where they actually, it's one of two states, Nebraska and Maine, that can split their electoral votes. I don't know why, but you got to ask a Nebraskan. So this is, again, maybe, even though it looks super weird from, conventions, it's actually a fairer way to look at the overall area and gauge area proportionally in comparison to see, like, who has the most, right? And again, it's just based on that prefrontal cortex, analyzing blue versus red, what's bigger, what's smaller, just lizard brain type stuff. Over on the CNN politics page, I gotta say, I don't believe they really have much, if anything, here to modify this. Map mode, lead size. Well, okay. Well, that did something with color, but it's not, you're not blowing me away here. You can see that when we switch to the lead size, it's really taking this kind of variation in value, and it's using that to kind of show us how far ahead it might be in one direction or another. I'm not a fan, honestly. If it really dipped to 0, then it should be white. That's how a divergent color palette would really work properly. So not my map of choice. If you just wanted to see key races, again, this is basically exactly what we saw over in the top left when we looked at battlegrounds only, which I guess we can do in this map mode. And yeah, it's just going to highlight those major races that are really important, the ones that are really close, or the ones that might swing one way or another. So some options, but not dramatically different perspectives. That's something that we end up seeing from the NBC News and the Politico. Let's take a look at the Washington Post. I don't think they gave us... Oh, wait, no, look at that. There's a little option over here for a cartogram. So they also give us the opportunity to break this down rather than topographically. We can look at this based on the sheer overall area used to represent proportionally the electoral votes for each state. Not too shabby, I would say. And in fact, the hover over these is much nicer than you can see the hover over this. Look at that. Chop, 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 chop. And whereas this is just very fluid. Okay. Over in the AP News, I think other than switching which race, which I'm not going to look at because a lot of these do have that, the opportunity to switch. You can see like President, Senate, House, these sorts of things. These are going to just switch, it's going to use the same map graph model. Yeah. But it's just going to look at these different races. And I'm not even going to focus on that. I'd rather focus on just the presidential race and look at the way that they use, visual language to communicate those things. So aside from that, I don't really see much in terms of like manipulating this map. So I think that's about it for this. Now, that being said, I still like it. I still gotta say, this is over the course of the night. This has been one of my favorite maps to look at. And then finally, if we take a look down at the bottom right here, what do we got? Well, not much from what I can see. Oh, wait, let's look at what these things are on the left. So you've got a number of these little mini maps here. So let's try the live forecast. Okay. Well, Well, I don't know really what this gets me because here we're just making every state equal. So bigger states, smaller states, they're all the same. That's okay if that's how the Electoral College worked, where every state had 1 point, but it's not. That's not how it works. So I don't know what the intention is behind this display. So let's move on because that seems dumb. So we're going to go to margin by county. Now, okay, this might be interesting. So we have a bubble plot on top of cartography. We can see that the larger bubbles are the more votes. At least that's what I'm interpreting from this. Okay, leader, Dem, rep. Circle size is proportional to the amount each county's leading candidate is ahead. So it's about the lead that they have. So Kamala has 1.5 million to 800,000 in an LA County. So based on that lead, which is about basically double, that's causing this to scale to that size. And I'm assuming they're using some kind of proportional algorithm that I would use where they say the max size based on the max lead is going to be this size, and then everything is proportional to that. So Cook County, pretty similar. Chicago, that's incredible. All right. Well, this, I would say, is a pretty interesting layout of this information. Again, we're not really worried about the size of the states. In fact, what's great about this is that we have county level data, which none of the other maps that we have looked at have actually given us. The only other map that I saw, which was from the Washington Post, was behind a paywall. And that was county level information about the shifts either towards Republican or towards Democratic voters that each county received. So this is actually quite valuable. It's also nice that they're using transparency in this, so you can kind of hover along and isolate your cursor on these individual circles, but you can also get a sense of density of these surrounding communities. So where the larger circles are, obviously, look at the eastern seaboard here. This is let's get some high-speed rail going here. So yeah, it's just a great way of revealing the population, the distribution of where the leads happen to be, and then, of course, like the proportional amount of those leads. Oh, and this, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I was describing, is behind the Washington Post's paywall. Thank the New York Times for opening this up on their own, but what is being represented here are arrows, and they are sized proportionally and color coded based on party. And so, based on the 2020 presidential vote in places that have reported almost all of their votes, if the current election results are more Republican, they will be red and pointed towards the upper right. And if they lean more Democrat than 2020, then they are blue and pointed towards the upper left. So I think this is maybe Atlanta. I'm not really familiar with Georgia. Barrow County, Jackson County, Polk County. A lot of blue pointing up to the upper left. But the overall trend of the entire country. Look at, geez, is that Idaho? No, this is Montana. Wow. That's a long arrow. And I have to believe that the longer the arrow, the bigger the difference, because we have got small arrows, 2.3 points more Republican. And then this one, 11 points. That's 11% difference in the last election, leaning towards that party. Wow. This chart right here tells an incredibly rich story. Very, very detailed. Incredibly interactive in that you can cursor over each individual line. In fact, we can zoom in on stuff too. So I can really see, what is that? Henry County, 9.2 points more Democratic. Incredible. Very, very good work from the interactive data desk at the New York Times. But that's not a surprise. They're known for doing good work like this. So I hope this has been informative. It's almost 2 a.m. here. So I'm going to wrap things up, and I hope you make some good maps in the future.